theory of the case is that the technology is Band-Aid, right? Like we got hit with this pandemic, we applied this Band-Aid because we had to, and now everything's going to revert to. That's not only delusional to me, it's just spectacularly uncreative. We were using technology before the pandemic. We were ready, Alex and I were ready for Zoom because we had a whole Taiwan program. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Carnegie Endowment, and welcome, team. I'm Evan Feigenbaum. I'm Vice President for Studies at Carnegie, where I lead a team focused on Asia, both here in Washington and at centers and operations that we have now in New Delhi and in Beijing, and also in Singapore, where we've just opened up an office. And then we have one person in Seoul and a few floaters around the world. So we have a global spanning Asia team. And I'm delighted that we can host Jung H, who is the senior official for North Korea as of a few, is it weeks or months? A couple of months ago. A couple of months at the State Department to talk a little bit about where things stand, both in and with North Korea. I wanted to just say three things by way of introduction. One about Carnegie, second about North Korea, and third about Jung. So first on Carnegie, I'm particularly delighted to do this because a big part of our expansion here at Carnegie is to do a lot more work on Korea. And there's three pieces to that. One, we have a long history of doing outstanding work on North Korea in our nuclear policy program, but also in the Asia program. But the biggest and fastest and most intense part of the build out of work here is, ironically enough, on South Korea, not just North Korea. And a lot of that build out is happening not just in the security area, but with an expansion of our work on technology policy, and also on governance and political economy. We just put out a report last week on Korea as a global standard setter. We've done works on South Korea and the future of data, governance, technology policy. And so we're looking at Korea here at Carnegie in a much more holistic, multifaceted, multidimensional way. And it's one of the most exciting parts of the build out of Asia work here. Second, we are doing a lot of work on North Korea. And as we were just talking about backstage, North Korea remains interesting. I've been going to conversations about North Korea in this town for, as has Mark and other people in the audience, for a few decades. And I always feel like I'm watching the same movie for the 43rd time. But having said that, there are things happening between North Korea and Russia, for example, in the trilateral between Russia, China, and North Korea, inside of North Korea, and in the dynamic in the region that make it interesting and different and extremely dynamic. So when I do feel like it's static sometimes, I remember that the situation in Northeast Asia and in North Korea itself is not static, it's highly dynamic, and that's part of what we want to talk about today. And that brings me to Jung. I can't think of anybody better to talk about that, not just because of the title that you hold and the seat that you're occupying, but because you've been doing this for a few decades yourself. Long career in national security, not just in the State Department, but in other agencies of the U.S. government. Formerly our neighbor next door here on Massachusetts Avenue, where you led Korean studies at Brookings. And now really in the hot seat, charged with managing U.S. policy toward North Korea and also the alliance dimensions of that as well. So I'm going to get off the stage. We're going to hand it to my new teammate, Darcie Draudt, who's part of that expansion that I just talked about, a new fellow in Korean studies here at Carnegie. And Darcie and Jung, we're really looking forward to hearing your conversation. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Darcie. Welcome, everybody.
Great, thank you, Evan. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to those who are joining us online. By way of brief introduction, I just joined Carnegie here, and it's nice to be able to talk about the peninsula as a whole. And I'm really excited that we have S.O. Pak here today to set up some of the things that the government is currently thinking about as we're approaching this intractable problem that is North Korea. So first, I'd just like to ask you, how is the U.S. government looking at the DPRK's role in the strategic environment today that is changing so quickly?
Thanks, Darcie. Congratulations to you on this new position at Carnegie, and it's great to be back in the neighborhood. I used to be at Brookings for 3 years, right next door, and so it's great to see old friends, new friends, old friends in new roles, and to see all of you. It's great to be in person, and thanks to all of you for joining online. And Evan, congratulations on building out the Korea program. It's a really important, one of the big anchors in the region for all that Korea does. It's really important to continue to study it and to encourage others to study it. So DPRK continues to be one of the most difficult security questions, problems that we have been working on. And its reach is being increasingly global. We're in a dangerous environment, and the situation is getting more complex, as Evan has suggested. First, the DPRK has continued to prioritize its nuclear weapons program and ballistic missile programs. It has announced plans to mass produce tactical nuclear weapons and to develop advanced capabilities like solid fuel ICBMs, hypersonic ballistic missiles, underwater nuclear attack drones, and military reconnaissance satellites. And we have seen them maintain a rapid pace of testing in pursuit of these goals. Second, in late 2023, Kim Jong Un overturned the policies of his father and grandfather by rejecting their goal of peaceful unification with the Republic of Korea. This shift has been accompanied by hostile and threatening rhetoric against the Republic of Korea and the dismantling of everything in the DPRK that has been focused on inter-Korean cooperation and engagement with the South. Finally, the DPRK has established military cooperation with Russia that has serious negative consequences for the region and global security. Due in part to our sanctions and export controls, Russia has been forced to seek out new sources for military goods, and in the DPRK, it has found a willing supplier. The DPRK has already sent dozens of ballistic missiles and thousands of containers of ammunition to Russia for use in its war against Ukraine. All of these transfers are, of course, blatant violations of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. As we assess what on their face are the most significant changes in DPRK's foreign policy in 30 years, one question many knowledgeable DPRK watchers have asked is whether Kim is truly undertaking a long-term strategic shift or whether these changes are a tactic intended to create or exploit divisions among the DPRK's adversaries. We believe it's the former. At this point, we don't assess that Kim Jong Un has changed his primary goal, the preservation of his regime, or the means by which he hopes to achieve this, the international acceptance of the DPRK as a nuclear weapons power. What has changed is that Kim seems to have decided he cannot achieve his primary goals through negotiations with the United States or the Republic of Korea. He's viewing the world through a new Cold War lens in which the DPRK can benefit from aligning more closely with Russia and the PRC. Even as he pursues these policy changes, the DPRK remains largely isolated from the outside world. Moreover, the regime spent the COVID years reasserting central government control over the DPRK economy and society more generally. And it continues to reject our repeated offers of dialogue, public and private, direct and indirect. Its decision last September to release Private Travis King, the US service member who crossed into the DPRK without authorization, was a welcome development, but unfortunately it has not yet led to broader engagement. Amid all of these challenges, my job as a senior official for the DPRK is to figure out how we work with our allies to maintain peace and security in the Asia-Pacific as we continue to pursue the ultimate goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We continue to believe that the only viable way is to achieve permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula is through dialogue and diplomacy. And to that end, even though the DPRK is uninterested in engagement, we will continue to message that we wish to resume dialogue without preconditions at any level and on any topic of concern. In the absence of engagement, however, we will continue to redouble our efforts alongside allies and partners to deter DPRK aggression, strengthen global security, promote respect for human rights, and cut off streams of revenue that fund the DPRK's weapons program. Thanks, Darcie, for having me deliver those opening comments, and really look forward to this discussion with you and to pick up where we last left off when in your previous roles.
Yeah, thanks. You've put a lot on the table for us. And obviously there's a lot of both threats, challenges for us and our international partners when it comes to North Korea. So there's a lot of things that we should be talking about right now. I have a few questions that I'm going to be asking SO Park, and I also want to tell the audience and those at home that there's a QR code on your seats if you'd like to send a question. I'll be gathering them and incorporating them in our conversation, and those online can submit them directly via YouTube. The first question or thought that all of us in the North Korean watching community is the question on Kim Jong Un's decision to change its policy vis-a-vis reunification, closing 3 government agencies that are related to working with the South Koreans. How can we, the United States and South Korea, as well as other allies in the regions, how is this shift going to be altering our strategy toward peace, stability in the region when North Korea is withdrawing? It's no longer just a COVID-era closing down the country. They've made the strategic decision, or they've said they've made the strategic decision to walk away from those sorts of goals.
Yeah, our goal is to, and the way we get permanent peace, the way we get security in the region and beyond is to engage in diplomacy. But DPRK has engaged in provocative activities in the past several years. As you know, there have been multiple ballistic missile tests. They're claiming new technologies like underwater unmanned vehicles. They're talking about hypersonic missiles, as well as other advanced technologies. And I think that the way the DPRK is looking at this is that it's framing the global situation as a new Cold War, because I think it's useful for them. They have found in Russia a willing partner in arms, and that effect could be seen by Kim as a way to show his gravitas or his standing in the world, having a permanent UN Security Council member, having its back politically as well as militarily. What is different, and Evan talked about all the various conversations we've had over the decades on the DPRK, is that we have two Security Council members who are providing political support. One is providing military support. And that we have Russia purchasing arms and using North Korean ballistic missiles to kill Ukrainian people and to conduct its brutal and unlawful invasion of Ukraine. And so we have these overlapping theaters, the Europe theater, and we have the Asia theater overlapping in unhelpful and quite dangerous ways. And so even as we press for dialogue and diplomacy with the DPRK, given the current situation, we need to do the needful in terms of keeping our people, our allies and partners, as well as our troops safe from the DPRK's activities.
On this topic of North Korea's shifting visions for the peninsula, I wonder if I could, and this is a question that I'm getting from the audience, is put on your hat as an analyst that you previously wore. Tung Pak wrote a fantastic book about Kim Jong Un and his life that is required reading, I think, for anybody who watches North Korea. But why do you think Kim Jong Un said they need to change the constitution? What does this signal to us as North Korea's leader making this decision, and this leader in particular?
I want to say that the fact that he's changing his constitution, and so there have been several constitutional changes, right, on the nuclear weapons program, and now on its foreign policy with respect to South Korea. These are not. I want to say, these are an intensification of what was already in train, right? These changes didn't come out of nowhere. These were in development and have evolved to what they are now. But that shouldn't preclude, I think, the outreach diplomacy should not preclude our continued efforts to engage our partners and like-minded partners and other friends around the world to try to get the DPRK to engage. So we've looked with positive views on, there were reports of some European delegations being able to go back into the country. So we welcome those developments. I think that, and we would also encourage the DPRK to further open its borders, in particular to allow for humanitarian cooperation. The country had been in lockdown during the pandemic since January of 2020. And there had been a substantial number of aid workers and other helpers who had been in the country delivering critical support to the North Korean people. So we would encourage further reopening of those borders. So we're going to keep doing the mindful in terms of humanitarian cooperation, in terms of continuing our outreach. But given some of the measures that the DPRK have taken, it's our responsibility to continue to support our allies, especially the Republic of Korea and Japan, and to strengthen our extended deterrence efforts.
Fantastic. Yeah. The other thing that you put on the table for us is the question of what North Korea is doing with its munitions exports, particularly with respect to Russia. Right? It was last week or the previous. There was a British research firm that had revealed that there were North Korea not only was giving missiles to Russia, but also there were international components to these. For a long time, we've been focusing on China when it comes to North Korea, at least since the end of the Cold War. What are the implications of this growing DPRK-Russia military cooperation for U.S. strategy?
The implications, I think, cannot be understated. As I mentioned, you have a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and of course, we have worked with Moscow in the past on DPRK issues in the way that we have worked with the PRC on DPRK issues. The fact that there is this arms transfers and the use of North Korea's weapons to conduct a war in Europe, those implications are huge, and what that means for global non-proliferation and security. So we have these overlapping theaters in Asia and in Europe. I've seen those reports on the parts that were found. We use and we will continue to use all tools at our disposal in terms of export controls, law enforcement, international sanctions, to try to really choke those, the transfer points that allow DPRK to develop those weapon systems and for those to be transferred for use in this unlawful war. So we have a variety of tools, diplomatic, military, as well as law enforcement. And we'll continue to press hard on that. This is, the war has been ongoing in Ukraine for a long time, and the fact that the DPRK is involved in that war is quite troubling.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It really is.
Darcie, you mentioned China.
Yeah.
When we came out with this policy and we announced it in the first several months of the new administration, of the Biden-Harris administration, we had talked about the PRC, that we will work with the PRC when it's in our interest, and there are several areas of cooperation. The DPRK has always been one of those areas for potential cooperation, and we continue to engage with our PRC interlocutors, from the president to the secretary to the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and also at my level, and to continue to encourage the PRC to play a more positive role. The PRC has over 90+% of trade with the DPRK, so the economic relationship can't be underestimated. The PRC also has political influence, given that the DPRK is also their only military or their only alliance, and we encourage the PRC to play a constructive role, whether it's full implementation of sanctions, as well as to continue to prod the DPRK to come to negotiations and dialogue and refrain from these activities that are harmful to regional security.
Yeah, I want to broaden this out a little bit, because when we think about North Korea, we're often hyper-focused on Northeast Asia. How is it disrupting Northeast Asia? But as we all know, North Korea's reach is actually quite further, right? It is a global disruptor, especially when it comes to cyber. We know a lot more that this is how North Korea is getting a lot of its income from foreign sources. Its ability to hack is quite refined. How is this something that we can talk with non-traditional partners, even outside of Asia? I'm thinking of Africa, for example, the Pacific more broadly. What sorts of things can we do in order to help shape what North Korea is doing?
So the DPRK threat has evolved over the decades, but the methods that they're using have also evolved. So in 2024, we have a DPRK that has a very sophisticated cyber program. The use of malicious cyber activity for espionage or to simply steal money. But then there is also the issue of DPRK IT workers whom they have deployed and who work to generate revenue for the regime. Some estimates go into the $1 billion or $2 billion. It's an amount that I think that has surpassed other forms of activities that generate revenue for the regime. I want to remind the audience that these are not that these cyber workers, these IT workers, and the cyber actors are also sanctioned because they work on behalf of or affiliated with sanctioned military entities. So we try to in our engagements we really are keen to alert all of our partners as well as industry and as well as journalists and think tankers and other experts about the dangers of some of the DPRK cyber activities. So last June, we released a cyber advisory and we brought in journalists and think tankers who had been targeted by DPRK cyber actors. They're using very sophisticated means. They're using AI to have perfect English when they're doing their solicitation. They're often not including attachments so that, we're always looking out for don't click on the attachment, but what happens there is no attachment and they're trying to establish a relationship. So we released a 6 seal along with the Republic of Korea advisory in June of last year to alert everyone to these issues, but also to provide a resource for everyone to report these activities so that we can collect that information and see where we can be helpful in tracking down or in protecting your system. So we talk to, given these new circumstances, we talk to our friends around the world, government and non-government, to make sure that they're tracking, that they keep their system safe, and we will. And we'll continue to do so. I also want to point out that we've made significant progress with the Republic of Korea through our U.S.-Korea cyber working group. We've had 5 meetings in the past 15 months, which is and it's brought together all of our interagencies to work on this effort. We've also briefed and talk to industry partners to make sure, this is a team sport. It can't just be government because government is its business doesn't move at the speed of government. They move faster. And so we want to make sure that industry also is able to identify and to target and to make sure that they're protecting their systems. So we've been doing that with the Republic of Korea. We also had our first trilateral cyber diplomatic dialogue with Japan back in December. So things have moved significantly, and we want to make sure that as the DPRK threat evolves, that we are also evolving and pressing forward.
I do want to take this moment as a public service announcement that anybody who writes on, researches on, speaks on North Korea, it's probably a good idea to brush up on those best practices.
It's a great public service announcement. I got an email yesterday from a think tank with the name of somebody that I recognized, but the email address was odd. Perfect English. It was exactly how I would imagine an invitation to speak. There were no attachments. I looked her up on the website. The email address was different, so I emailed her and said, "Did you send me an email?" And she said, "No." Thanks for flagging that. We've been trying to really crack down on the spoofing emails. So always be on the lookout. No one is immune. And I'd also add, as an added public service announcement, that the DPRK does not discriminate on who the targets are. It doesn't matter if you're a friend or a foe. Of course, I would be targeted. Government officials would be targeted. And our allies, Korea and Japan, would be targeted. But they've also targeted their traditional socialist friends, right? Yeah. Vietnam Bank, right? And others like Mexico and Sri Lanka, and it doesn't matter really who you are, as long as it's kind of like COVID, in that you're only as safe as your weakest communities. And so our job is to make sure that our weakest communities have the capacity to be able to look out for these things, because, as you say, the DPRK cyber threat is global in scope.
It's all about networks, right?
Yes.
So just to find the weakest link, no matter who it is, even if you don't think you're at risk, it can be connected through that, as we all know.
So I can't underscore this enough in terms of, you are a target, and so make sure that you're taking the precautions.
I want to follow up on this point about such diverse actors around the world, because now we have countries in what many call the global south who might not have the capacity to work hard on these issues, to help implement sanctions, even if you have buy-in from them. So what kind of work have you been doing vis-a-vis smaller? I know your portfolio includes much of the Pacific. So what kind of work have you been doing?
Yeah, on the cyber account, so we talk to industry, we talk to all of our global partners. It's important to, as a security person, I think about security all the time. But when you're a business person, you're not necessarily thinking about the security, but because you're thinking about growing the business. And as economies around the world try to develop their digital ecosystems, their e-commerce, and using the various emerging technologies, and that we want to make sure that the security, they might not be interested in security threats, but the security threats are interested in them, and that to build in security as part of the way they think about building up their digital ecosystems. And so this is not just a security matter, but for economic security, that they want to make sure that they protect their systems. I want to also highlight that the DPRK IT workers. These are DPRK IT workers who use various websites, legitimate websites, to get jobs and get paid for their legitimate jobs, but also work through the back door to steal technologies and other intellectual property, but also to collect information. So the threat is varied. We're tracking it. We're working very hard on capacity building. That's one of the key tools that we have. Our bench is deep, and our motivations are strong to make sure that as in the pandemic, that all of our communities are safe.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have been filtering in. The first one is how does the U.S. judge China's response or lack of response to military cooperation between North Korea and Russia? For example, has China been supportive? Have they been equally as concerned? What sort of sense are you getting from your dialogue with your Chinese counterparts?
Yeah, I want to highlight that that when we released the North Korea strategy, and when we also talk about our China strategy, that DPRK has always been one of those points of potential cooperation with Beijing, and we continue to encourage Beijing to play a more positive role, given the influence that they have on DPRK, historical and political and economic and otherwise. And we have also highlighted the dangers of growing DPRK and Russia alignment, and that this has implications for not just the U.S. or the Republic of Korea and Japan, but that it also has implications for the PRC and for regional stability, of which is a key priority for Beijing. And so we'll continue to press on that. And we think it's really important to highlight and not underestimate the global and security and regional implications of North Korea's cooperation with Russia and what that deepening cooperation might mean.
So thinking about the region then, there's several questions coming in about our military alliance with South Korea and how is this fitting in the picture in this changing landscape. How do you think South Korea could effectively engage with us, both via our bilateral relationship, but also more broadly, either via trilateral, with other partners outside of the region? There's a question here, how should or could South Korea constructively engage with NATO on North Korea, given the overlap of Asia and Eurasia and European, right? This theater is now broader.
I think this is a great question, and it's really important. And I think this is, kudos to Evan and the team and for growing the focus on studies on Korea. Korea's been a terrific partner. We have a really strong alliance with the Republic of Korea. The relationship and our policy alignment and work and cooperation on the DPRK issue is deep and vast. It's also deep and vast trilaterally with Japan. My predecessor, Ambassador Sung Kim, we've had multiple trilateral conversations. We move forward trilaterally as well as bilaterally, and we made great significant progress. And I feel very confident and very positive about that cooperation with the Republic of Korea and DPRK issues. And thanks to President Yoon's and Prime Minister Kishida's political courage, we were able to have the Camp David summit, which was really a watershed moment in trilateral cooperation. And I think that speaks to Korea's role beyond the DPRK issue, right? Beyond the Korean Peninsula. We see Korea playing a role. They're going to host Summit for Democracy, which is fantastic, which is something that was a priority for the president, for President Biden. And we're really happy about that and Korea taking such a lead role in the Summit for Democracy. We're really, Korea is an important player on emerging technologies, on critical minerals, on cyber issues. And so, we were clear when we came into this administration that allies and partners are first, and Korea has really risen up to that challenge and our ambitions together in terms of what all the things that we can do together. We do a lot together in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands, across the globe, and I think it's a terrific question on NATO as well, given as I mentioned the overlapping theaters of the Indo-Pacific and Europe, that it's really important that the two groupings work together on not just the DPRK issues, but issues across the board.
Yeah. Let's go forward a little bit then, because thinking about it historically, North Korea has tended to often exclude South Korea from its efforts, its diplomatic outreach to the United States. We've seen this upticks over the years. Given that the DPRK has declared South Korea as an enemy state, or I forget the exact language that they used, hostile state, I think it was, how do you see that shaping the future of our engagements, right? Given that we offer talks without preconditions, how are you taking this peninsular and U.S. trilateral?
Right. So I'm not going to take that as a given that somehow that's something that's going to prevent us from doing what we need to do. And if the DPRK comes out and they start reopening their borders and they're talking and they're re-engaging with the world, other than just Russia and China, that would be a positive development. Yeah. And we have always encouraged inter-Korean conversations and dialogue. And want to make sure that we create the space for those conversations. And so I think it's unfortunate that the DPRK has been releasing those pretty hostile messages or kind of the rhetoric coming out of Pyongyang is not helpful, but that shouldn't stop us from continuing to press for the DPRK to engage with Korea and Japan and the U.S. and other countries.
Thinking about this question of engagement and diplomacy, this is another question that came up. You mentioned that the U.S. is open to dialogue without preconditions with North Korea. Would you be interested, the U.S. be interested to open to achieve certain arms control goals, like caps on missiles, even if the DPRK does not agree to give up its nuclear weapon? We'll talk about nuclear weapons. That's a whole. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what do you think about the argument that the U.S. should let go of policy objective that has long guided DPRK strategy? That is the complete denuclearization of the country.
Our position, our goal is clear, which is to say, we're continuing to work for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And let me inject there too that we've heard that argument before in previous times, but to talk about that, I think could be way down the line in terms of, but I would say that North Korea has proliferated ballistic missiles, right, and are engaged in this relationship with Russia. Yeah. So I think maybe we need to think about what that argument is on those conversations about the arms control arguments. But denuclearization is not going to happen overnight. I think everybody knows this, and of course, there are going to be steps that need to be taken to get there. And of course, we would welcome any kind of signals from the DPRK that they're willing to engage. So far, we've continued to do outreach, but we have not received a response. But I do think it's positive development that some of the European delegations reportedly were able to go back into the country, at least in recent days.
Yeah, how have you been working with the Europeans on this? Because they have many European countries have a long-standing practice, and North Koreans do welcome a lot of their engagement. Yeah. So how does that work?
No, I think, we've continued to work with our European partners. The European partners have some of been our strongest partners, given their commitment to non-proliferation, and of course, this is much more salient now because of Russia's relationship with North Korea. So I also feel very confident and positive about the trajectory of our engagement. And granted, I am in the East Asia Pacific Bureau of the State Department, but I talk to our European partners a great deal, and I think that speaks to the strength of our collaboration on not just issue, but on all sorts of issues related to the Indo-Pacific.
Then it becomes Eurasian, right? Then right? Yeah. We think about it differently then. Yeah. So it's important. All right. Here's a question from Eun-Jung Cho from VOA. She asks.
She's right there.
There you are. Well, I'm going to ask your question for you because this is what we're doing. As noted by Dr. Mira Rapp-Hooper, the U.S. is taking interim steps toward denuclearization as an official U.S. government policy. Will these interim steps involve a DPRK nuclear freeze, sanctions relief? How can you prevent interim steps from ending up being only a final step? Right? We're not getting that extra mile, I think is what the question is.
I don't want to prejudge that as a final step, but I think it goes without saying that there would have to be interim steps toward ultimate denuclearization, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a lot of weapons to be dealt with, that, as I mentioned and laid out at the top of the hour, in terms of all of the solid fuel, the tactical nuclear weapons, the hypersonic capabilities that they've been flaunting, the UUVs, and so these are all, given the scope of the DPRK's weapons activities and its proliferation, there's a lot to work with there, and I think that to think that this is going to happen overnight is not going to happen overnight. I mean that's the reality of it. But of course we'll continue to engage and explore ways that we can get the DPRK.
Mic working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So on this, considering potentials for misunderstanding and North Korea's not accepting your outreach, what unilateral steps could the U.S. take, or have you taken to reassure North Korea to lessen chance of risk, especially what's going on with the U.S. ROC joint exercises right now? I'm sure that it's bubbling.
Yeah. I mean, of course, as you know, Darcie, better than most people, the U.S. ROC exercises are purely defensive, and they're in response to the threats in the region. So unilaterally, in terms of what?
What could we do to
Oh, right.
to reassure them? Is there an olive branch?
Yeah. So I think there's what we've said, and I remember this. We've talked about no hostile policy, right? We don't have a hostile policy toward or hostile intentions for the DPRK, and you've heard our senior leadership talk about no hostile intentions. You've heard our President Biden talk about his willingness to talk to North Korea. You've heard my predecessor, Ambassador Kim, talk about wanting to talk without preconditions. And even in the previous administration too, we've offered COVID assistance during the pandemic, which is of course the right thing to do. We've talked about confidence building measures. So when we say no preconditions, there are no preconditions, and that on humanitarian issues, that's the right thing to do, and we would do that regardless of what the political situation is, and we would. We have no hostile intentions for the DPRK, and about those security guarantees over the years have been given to the DPRK. And we have used other previous agreements, including the Singapore Summit Declaration, as folded into our approach. That we're not recreating something new, but that we're also taking what Kim Jong Un also agreed to back in Singapore, and making sure that that North Korea realizes and understands that we don't have these hostile intentions that they say that the United States does.
Yeah, I mean, one of the very sad and unfortunate outcomes of what's been happening over in North Korea over the past 5-6 years is the level of a humanitarian engagement that's just no longer impossible. There's lots of certainly NGOs that are both from the United States, Europe, South Korea, Japan, all over the region that did such good work there that now can't be done. And this is another part of the North Korea puzzle, though, is the North Korean people. So how can we incorporate questions about the North Korean people, human rights? How can we incorporate that into this strategy going forward? This is perennially the issue.
So we encourage DPRK to open the borders to humanitarian cooperation. We think it's important for the country, especially during the lockdowns of COVID. We want to make sure that children are vaccinated, that the health systems are in order, and they're really good people working on DPRK issues and working on behalf of the people, regardless of what the political situation is. And I think that's really important. The other side, too, is human rights, different from humanitarian aid. That DPRK relies on human rights violations, that there is a link between human rights violations and the security issue, that he relies on slave labor, he relies on these labor camps and the tamping down of the people and their livelihood to and the weapons program and Kim's foreign policy and his approach to foreign affairs. And so our human rights envoy Julie Turner is doing tremendous work, making sure to shed a light on these human rights violations. And I think it's really important that we continue to focus on the North Korean people, who are really the biggest victims in all of this situation. And she's been working with the Republic of Korea and Japan and European partners and anyone and human rights activists and advocates, as well as defectors, to work in behalf of the North Korean people. I would also say that it's the Japanese abductees issue is as you know, is one of the most tragic stories of daughters and sons and fathers and mothers who've been abducted by the DPRK many decades ago, still unaccounted for. And so we support Japan in those efforts and encourage resolution of those issues. And of course, the Republic of Korea also has abductees and POW families and separated families, and as well as Korean Americans in the United States also have are divided families themselves or POW families. So this is a complicated issue, the DPRK. So it's not just the WMD programs, but it's also this decades-long abductees issue, the POW issue, and so the humanitarian issues. So it's a lot to work on, but I think we have really good partners in the government space, but also in the non-government space.
Right, and you have this, what's in effect, you have adoptees in North Korea, but then you also have a broad North Korean diaspora, divided families. So if we are taking a human-centered approach to looking at North Korea as not just the purveyor of nuclear threats in the region, but also a people that are victim to these. It also opens up, I think, areas for cooperation. So not just defectors or escapees, but also the thousands of North Korean migrants that the regime sends abroad. That's, I think, a point of issue I know in a lot of in both Asia and Europe. Some of the people I've talked to in those countries, it's not known that a lot of companies outside of North Korea do employ North Koreans through subcontracting.
Right, and DPRK overseas laborers are not allowed by UN Security Council resolution. So want to make sure that. So and you're right. The possibilities for engagement too. I mean, North Korea made some progress on disability rights several years ago. So we want to leave open that avenue for cooperation. I also want to say that on the policy side, we were able to get North Korean human rights back on the Security Council agenda, formal agenda for the first time in 6 years. And of course, Julie Turner, who's our human rights envoy, that position had been vacant for a number of years, and she's finally on board and very much working, burning the midnight oil on these issues. So on the policy side, we're in a good place, and we continue to get better and make progress, hopefully.
On the UNSC, there's a question about how the inclusion of South Korea and Japan on the UNSC as temporary members, how is this going to change the international landscape, affect international policy, security efforts toward Northeast Asia? Yeah,
no, it's a great development. Korea and Japan are together on the Security Council for the first time in, I think, 27 something years. So it's a very positive development to have for us to have such strong trilateral cooperation, but also that we have these two countries who are anchors in the region, who are democratically elected leaders in their fields economically, politically, and also amplifying their global voices for them to be on the Security Council. And given Russia and China's efforts to undermine the Security Council's work, especially on DPRK, it's really important that and a welcome development, and that Korea and Japan are together on the Security Council, at least for this year.
Okay, let's see, there's so many good questions here. even prior, how can the Biden, I like this question, how can the Biden administration work with other partners, again, we're thinking about non-traditional or out of region, other partners that have diplomatic ties with North Korea, namely India and Vietnam, to push North Korea back to the negotiating table? Sounds like something completely different than a six-party, right? We're in a different mind of thinking right now.
Yeah, no, I think we would support any kind of diplomacy or engagement that the DPRK has, except for Russia, of course. And I think that we want to make sure that whatever engagement that the DPRK has with other countries that are positive or constructive relationships. India, of course, is a great partner. Vietnam is also a great partner. We've elevated our partnership with Vietnam last year. Yeah. We are doing more things than ever with India, with bilaterally, but also through the Quad mechanism. So I think here we again focus on allies and partners, right? And to make sure that in talking about issues, in releasing information or sharing information as they become available, that kind of transparency and that kind of honesty really shows our allies and partners, whether it's India or Vietnam or anybody else for that matter, why we do the things that we do, like why we have the policies that we have, and why we're having the approach that to the DPRK and to other countries or other issue sets have, so that our partners are also comfortable leading with us, right? And using those consultations and using information and doing things in concert is a powerful way that we work with allies and partners on the DPRK issue. So, for example, a few weeks ago, for the first time, along with Australia, that the Korea, Japan, the U.S., and Australia released sanctions or designated entities. So that's just one small example of how we're working with various partners. But as diplomats, that's what we do, and we were clear that we're talking with allies and partners first and foremost, and so that we go together and take a more powerful approach in a community as a community.
Yeah, I don't envy diplomats. You have a hard job ahead of you. And we're running up on time here, so I wanted to give you just a space to wrap up. When we talk about North Korea, we face so many challenges. It's so difficult. Yeah. And they're very scary challenges. They're quite scary challenges. But you have, you've listed some tactics, some tools, for how we can think about strategy. So what are you, in your new role, you've been doing this for a couple months now, but in your new role, what are you most looking forward to or hopeful about the sorts of tools that are on your table right now as it comes to North Korea? Yeah,
I feel very positive about our relationships with Korea, Japan, various European countries, but also non-traditional countries. I think we've paid a great deal of attention to partners and potential partners outside of the region, and I think that's an area for growth. The cyber efforts, again, another growth industry, and I feel very positive about it in the way that we are growing expertise. We have deep benches, and we are developing other friends, deep benches, and that's really important to us. State Department does capacity building very well, and that's one of our superpowers. And so we'll continue to do that. And so I feel very positive and confident about our allies and partners. And that's because we focus from day one on allies and partners, and the way that we're creating linkages and connecting countries to another. We don't always have to be a part of that. Sometimes the words are more powerful when it comes from somebody else. And the minilaterals and the multilaterals and other groupings, everybody has different skill sets. And so we've all been trying to weave all of that together to tackle issues, whether it's DPRK or some other issue. So building that muscle memory, building the team, I think will bear fruit now and in the future.
Fantastic. As somebody who's very interested in a pluralistic future world, that sounds quite productive. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you,
and thank you
Darcie.
everyone in the room, online. Let's join everyone with thanking SOPOC for her remarks
Thanks for your
today.
questions.
Yeah, and thank you for your questions.